I'm going to read from Luke chapter 17. If you'd like to follow, you may. Luke chapter 17, verse 6. And I'm going to read a couple other verses as well. The Lord said, "If you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you might say unto this sycamore tree, Be thou plucked up by the roots, and be thou planted in the sea, and it should obey you." And from Matthew chapter 17, verses 18 through 20. "And Jesus rebuked the devil, and he departed out of the boy," or the man, "and the child was cured from that very hour. And then came the disciples apart to Jesus and said, Why could not we cast him out? And Jesus said unto them, Because of your unbelief. For verily I say unto you, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you shall say unto this mountain, Remove to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible to you." And from Matthew chapter 21, verses 16 through 20. "Now in the morning, Jesus returned into the city, hungered. And when he saw a fig tree in the way, he came to it, and there was not any fruit on it, but only leaves. And he said unto it, Let no fruit grow on thee henceforward forever. And presently the fig tree withered away. And when the disciples saw this, they marveled, and said, How soon is the fig tree withered away? And Jesus said unto them, Verily I say unto you, if ye have faith, and doubt not, ye shall not only do this to the fig tree, but also, if ye say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, it shall be done. And all things, whatsoever ye shall ask in prayer, in faith believing, ye shall receive." If you recall, I read from Matthew and Luke about Christ's words on faith. And they're pretty pointed. If you believe, you will say to this mountain, Be moved. In the context of the fig tree, he had just got done withering the fig tree. He said, You'll do more than this if you believe. David was a young man, probably in his teens, when he was asked by his father to take a wagon load of food to his brothers at the front lines of the war with the Philistines. And when he arrives, and we've all heard the story a number of times growing up, but in my mind, he arrives and he hears Goliath out on the field yelling a challenge. And in the heart of this teen, maybe he's 18 or 19, old enough to go across several miles, maybe across several days' journey to get to the front lines, arises in his heart this rejection of what he hears. And he says, Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And his brothers are standing there getting a little irritable, and I can identify a little bit with his brothers. I was an oldest brother, so I can kind of identify with what I might feel like when my younger brother comes up and is acting a little bit haughty. And I can imagine them standing there saying, Come on, go on home. We're doing men's work here. I can imagine them thinking serious thoughts about their likelihood of dying in the coming days. Looking at that giant and the army amassed on the other side of the way, and recognizing that their king, the one who should lead them into battle, is not going out to meet Goliath. I can imagine some very serious thoughts and a little bit of impatience. But when David is brought to Saul, David said, Don't worry about Goliath. I'll go fight him. And so Goliath gives him his armor. Saul gives David his armor, and David tries it on, and it's It's just too big. But he says to Saul, don't worry about Goliath. God will protect me. When a lion and a bear came to take my flocks, I ran out and took the sheep from the mouth of the lion, grabbed him by the beard and killed him, and I killed the bear too. This was not to puff himself up. He said this to say, God protected me then, and God will protect me now. This was not to talk about how good he was with a sling and stone, because clearly if you grab a lion by the beard, you're not going to use a sling to kill him. He might have used his sling with the bear, but that was not the point. The point was, God is with me. God is calling you to action. Do you know what he's asking you to do? Seek him out. Learn to listen. When David arrived at the battlefield, he did not know what was in store for him. He did not know that Goliath was standing there challenging. But in the moment, he felt the call and he replied, I will go. The story of David is a story of faith, and it is a story of action. Sometimes faith is trust in a person, just blind trust. We don't know what they're going to do, but we just trust that they're going to do the right thing. Sometimes faith is confidence in a plan. Sometimes faith is power to change the world. But always, faith means action. Faith is trust in a person sometimes. Sometimes we go to God, we don't know what he's going to do, but we put our trust in him. We said, God, will you take care of this? We don't know what he'll do, but we trust that he's going to do something good. Even if it doesn't appear good to us, we know that what he's doing is the best thing. We have a story about this in Daniel chapter 6. Daniel in the lion's den is how we typically think of this story. Daniel was surrounded. He was second in the kingdom, second only to the king. And those who were jealous wanted to get rid of him. So they hatched a plan, knowing the only thing they could find to undermine Daniel was his belief in God. In every other way, he walked uprightly, perfectly before the king. And so they devised a plan whereby Daniel's own faith could condemn him. Daniel, aware of the new law, went home as he always did, didn't bother to close the windows because that wasn't the point. He went home as he always did, and he prayed as he always had. He knew his life was at risk, but he trusted in God. He did not know what God would do that day. He did not know if he would be seen, though he did not care. He blindly followed God without regard for the specific implementation details of God's plan. He just trusted. The story of Daniel is a story of faith and is a story of action. He did not shy away from his prayers despite the risk. He acted as he always had. Sometimes faith, though, is confidence in a plan. This is a form of trust in a person. We trust that the person created a good plan, but we have confidence in this plan because of the person. We derive that confidence from the person, but truly we have this confidence in their plan. We don't know why the plan works. We've been given the plan, but we just follow it. We don't know what the other parts of the plan are, perhaps. We know our part, and we're going to do that part. Confidence in the plan. I'm doing my part, and I trust God will do his part. We have an example of this in Judges chapter 6 and 7. We more commonly know this as the story of Gideon and the Midianites. In the middle of the night, an angel wakes Gideon up and says, God is going to save Israel through you. Now, the threat of the Midianites was not a present one. They weren't camped out on their borders at that moment. But season after season, they come and they attack, and the Midianites have prevailed. And so Gideon has this thought, God's going to save Israel through me. After the angel leaves a little bit later, the Lord wakes him up and says, go knock down the altars of Baal. So Gideon gets his servants together and they go knock down the altars of Baal in the cover of night because this was a risky move. The next morning, the Israelites are mad because this altar of Baal has been knocked down and they want to kill Gideon. I presume that one of his servants ratted him out. But his dad stands up and defends Gideon, his son, and says, if Baal is a god, let Baal come down and defend his own altar. And the crowd kind of disperses, and from that point forward, Gideon has the nickname Jerubbaal, which apparently means let Baal stand for himself. But sometime after this, we have the message to Gideon, God will save Israel through you. The Midianites come, as they have before, and Gideon blows the trumpet to gather the army, to gather the men. And then he puts out his fleece. They're going to war either way, but he puts out his fleece. God, did you really talk to me? Are you really going to save Israel through me? And once he has his assurance, God starts giving him the plan. And Gideon has confidence in the plan. I can't imagine that Gideon looked at this plan and said, I can see how that would work. Gideon has confidence in the plan, and step by step, I'm not even convinced that he had the whole plan at once. He was given a step at a time. And he's gotten his army whittled down. They're out close to the Midianite army, and a man comes up and tells us a dream that he's had. And the Spirit rests upon Gideon, and he knows this is from God. This is the time. And he takes the men out, and they followed the plan. And God won the battle. God caused the Midianites to fight themselves. Gideon had confidence in the plan. The story of Gideon is a story of faith, and it's a story of action. He risked his life throwing down the altar of Baal. He risked his life leading an untrained, undersized army to face a known enemy, an enemy known to be able to defeat them at their largest, at their best. He followed the plan. And God gives us a plan. He tells us that he will save us. He shows us wonders. He tells us what the plan is. He gives us some tasks to do. And faith is action. God is calling you to action. Sometimes faith is trust in a person. Sometimes faith is confidence in a plan. Sometimes faith is power to change the world. Sometimes God will say, if you do this, I will do that. And in a way of speaking, we wield God's power in those moments. Not directly, indirectly. If you do this, then I will do that. Meaning this other thing doesn't happen unless if we do the first thing. If we choose not to act, God's power does not get manifest. If we choose to act, God's power is manifest. In a way, indirectly, we wield God's power. God's the one swinging the sword or throwing the shovel. Sometimes, though, God gives a revelation, foreknowledge of an event. He says what will happen, unconditionally. This is going to happen. And then he tells us to act. We trust revelation because it comes from God. So this is in part derived from trust in a person. But in truth, we don't have actual knowledge. Foreknowledge is not the same as knowledge because it hasn't happened yet. So when we act on foreknowledge, that's faith. It is not knowledge until afterwards. We know that knowledge comes after our faith. So I don't want you to be confused. Foreknowledge comes before knowledge. And so when we act on foreknowledge, we're acting on faith. And when you act with foreknowledge, you have the power to change the world. We always change the world a little bit when we act, but most of the time our changes are insignificant, inconsequential. When you act with foreknowledge, however, you're able to leverage momentum of large events in the world, powerful events already in motion in ways to dramatically change the world. A boulder rolling down a hill can be knocked out of its way by a smaller rock. When you have foreknowledge, you can be that smaller rock. The boulder is going to be rolling down the hill, God says. If you stand here, the boulder will move. You are small in comparison to that boulder, but you create a big change because of foreknowledge. Your actions are magnified when properly timed with foreknowledge. When I was a little younger, shortly out of college, I was exploring my faith a little bit, and I had this kind of logic problem that I presented to God. God, do you work in the past? When I pray, can you change the past to answer my prayer? To me, it kind of changed what kinds of things would I ask for. Could I only ask for things that would be in the future? Or could I ask for things that really were changing the past? You might think that this is a silly thing to ask God, but it was very important to me. It is important to me. I think it shapes my faith. But as God has often worked with me, he did not answer in the moment. He answered over a few days. At that time, I was working with a youth group. We called ourselves Christ Kingdom Seekers, and we planned a service project. And my job was to call the names of a few people who we knew who might need their leaves raked that year. And so I had a list of 6 or 7 people, I think. And as I was going down this list, I felt led to skip one name. No idea why. So I went and called all the rest of the names and cycled back to the top because not everybody had answered, and I went back down and was prompted to skip this name again. 3 or 4 times I was prompted to skip this name. In the end, I thought, well, I guess I'm done if I'm not calling this name. I set my list down and I went back to my work. A few moments later, then I was prompted, now's the time to call that person. And it caught me a little bit off guard because I was ready to go back to work. So I said, okay. I picked up the phone and I called, and they answered. This woman answered, and I explained that we were trying to do the service project. I asked if she needed her yard raked. And she says, oh, my goodness, yes. I was just outside asking God to send someone to help. When did you guys plan this? And, of course, it had been several days. But key to me was the foreknowledge God had given me. Just for a few moments, just slightly before, God had said, no, this is not the right time. He had given me, in a very small way, power to change this event. Had I called early, she would have received help in a time of need, not an answer to prayer. Certainly she'd expressed her need to others because somebody put it on my list. This is a person who is in need. Her need was not unknown, but in that moment, she was standing outside and prayed and asked God for help. And in that moment, God went back and worked with me. That night, God answered 2 prayers. Another example we have of this power to change the world comes from Numbers chapter 20. Moses and the host of Israel are camped out, and they're dying of thirst. And they're murmuring and complaining at Moses. In fact, it's rising to the level of rebellion. Why did you lead us out of Egypt into this place and there's no water? We would have been better off dying in Egypt than dying out here in the desert. Moses goes to God, and God tells him, go strike that rock, and water will come out. So Moses now has foreknowledge of what will happen if he acts. He has the power to change the world. In a twist to this story, however, when Moses goes over to strike the rock, he takes some personal aggrandizement. He takes credit for this. Do I have to do everything for you guys? And he strikes the rock and water comes out. He acted with foreknowledge, but he changed the course of history by his choice. He could have chosen to do nothing, people would have died. He chose to act, people lived. But he chose to act in an unrighteous way, and as a result, God said, because of this, you will not cross over into the promised land. I don't know what our scriptures would have been like if he had acted righteously in that moment, but it would have been different. Moses would have crossed over probably, into the promised land. If this is the reason he couldn't cross over, then if he had acted righteously, he probably would have. The story of Moses is a story of faith, and it's a story of action. He had his doubts about God's plan, but he presented those to God, and God answered them, and he said, I will act. He did not stand idly by. Despite having some missteps, he acted. Moses did the job required of him and led the nation out of slavery and into freedom. I would say it's a pretty dramatic story of changing the world. Sometimes faith is trust in a person. Sometimes faith is confidence in a plan. Sometimes faith is power to change the world. But always, faith means action. Do you really trust someone if that belief doesn't rise to the level of action or intentional inaction, as the case may be? When David heard Goliath, David didn't just say to his brothers or to himself, I believe God's going to save us today. What he did do was said, I will stand against this blasphemer. Gideon didn't just say, I believe God will someday save the country through me, and then stay home. He said, God, I don't know why you chose me. Am I really hearing you? I'm willing to serve. I will serve. And then he went to work and got busy. Daniel didn't just say, I believe in God and I will continue to believe in God, and then close his windows. He said, I believe in God, and regardless of the outcome, I will continue to pray. Regardless of the outcome. Moses didn't just say, I believe you, God, that you can make water come out of that rock. He got up, took his rod in his hand, and smacked that rock twice, and water came out. God made water come out. Only apathy or a lack of knowledge can describe a faith, perhaps a true faith, that does not result in action. Only apathy or a lack of direction can be a real faith that does not result in action. If you are not doing what God wants for you to do, what God has called for you to do, you either need more faith, more charity, or more direction. God is calling you to action. Do you know what he wants you to do? Seek him out and learn to listen. Religion is called faith because it is a trust in a person. It is confidence in a plan. And we, in particular, believe in revelation, the power to change the world. And faith in God means action. If you really trust in God, if you really have confidence in his plan, and if you know what he wants you to do, then you need to get busy doing it. Lay out your fleece, but then blow the trumpet. Try on the armor, but then walk towards the giant. Pick up your rod and smack the rock. Choose your words wisely. God is calling you to action. So go in faith and live, really live.